Students, I hope you have enjoyed the last video on how to tackle the lower order skills question. So in this video, I'll be explaining to you how to tackle the higher order skills question. For this particular video, is mainly about the 8-mark question on comparative advantage. So I hope we can sit back and learn together. Now, when it comes to higher order skill questions, these are my basic tips. The marks are now given based on level. So if you recall that question part B, okay, where it's like 1 mark for the diagram, 1 mark to explain the diagram, 1 mark to link to the increasing stocks, the final mark is given for the increasing exports. We no longer give marks by points for the 8-mark question as well as 10-mark question. So the key is this: for the 8-mark question, right, is 6 plus 2. 6 marks, right, is for the analysis, okay, max mark for analysis. The remaining 2 marks is for a justified conclusion. Likewise, right, when it comes to 10 marks, okay, it's basically 7 plus 3. Okay, 7 marks for the main analysis, and then 3 marks for evaluation as well as a justified conclusion. So the key is this: for the higher order skills question, you will need evaluation as well as a justified conclusion to get all the 2 and 3 marks, the plus 2 and the plus 3. The point is this: time is indeed of the essence. So in your A levels as well as your prelims, your paper 1, right, you have 2 hours 15 minutes for 2 full case study questions. So it's really a race against time. So when it comes to the higher order skills questions, right, I would advise students cover the breadth first. That means if the question requires some kind of balanced view, some kind of TAS approach, have at least 2 good points, 1 point for each side. It will be foolish to be a one-sided, to give a one-sided answer when the question asks you for balanced view. So 1 point for each side first, and then work on the depth. So let's try to practice this for question D. So for this case study, right, the 8-mark question is this: discuss how far the concept of comparative advantage explains whether India should specialize in agriculture products or other goods. So when I look at the command word discuss and I see the word how far, right, it's similar to the question, to the phrasing to what extent. So this tells you that you need a TAS approach, okay, thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So I've always talked about causality and cause and effect, right? So if I were to apply the cause and effect approach here, think of this as this: how far is the theory of CA the main reason that explains the choice of specializing in agriculture goods? So yes, okay, the theory of CA is indeed a very good reason to explain the specialization choice. So the cause is the theory of CA, the effect is the specialization in agriculture goods. But this question requires to give another possible reason, okay, that India end up specializing in agriculture products other than comparative advantage. So let's tackle the thesis first. So in this case, right, this is very similar to your essay questions on you to use the law of CA to explain trade based on comparative advantage. So now, because it's an 8-mark question and you need an antithesis, so you shouldn't spend too much time, right, having a full numerical demonstration of the law of comparative advantage. Okay, you don't need to draw PPC. You don't need to show the partial specialization in your HCI notes. You can just write in words. But if you ask me, right, from experience, because many students' handwriting tend to be pretty difficult to read, and you all tend to write in a very loose way without using much economics, so I will strongly recommend students to still use the 2 by 2 table. Okay, this will allow you to demonstrate your analytical depth to your Cambridge markers. But the key is this: you want to link it to relative factor abundance. So as I said to you when we went through the case study extracts, India, right, is an example of a country that is relatively land abundant as well as unskilled labor abundant. Since agriculture good, is a good that is a very land intensive good. It uses a lot of land and it also uses a lot of unskilled labor. You would think that India should have a comparative advantage in producing agriculture goods. Now, if you're using a 2 by 2 table, right, a good country to use for a country other than India would be Singapore. So you're comparing India, Singapore, our comparative advantage should not be in agriculture goods, but rather another good. So in this case, if you're using the 2 by 2, I'll use agriculture goods and electronic goods. So your main analytical point for this thesis should be that since India will have a lower op cost in producing agriculture goods, the law of CA will predict that she will gain from trade by specializing in agriculture goods. That is how far the concept of CA explains agriculture specialization for India. So I hope that's clear. What about the antithesis? Now, there are actually two ways one might approach it with the way this question is phrased. The HCI approach is that, like I said, right? How there are other reasons other than CA that could explain specialization in agriculture. When you read extract 2 and 3, as I said, right, there are there's a lot of government intervention in the India's agriculture market. Could it be those reasons, the subsidy, the minimum price, that could explain why India produced so much agriculture? So if it was because of the subsidy, then it need not be a comparative advantage reason. Okay, that is the HCI approach, and I think it's the approach that will be clearest to most students. However, if you read how this question is phrased, right, there's yet another way that you might want to approach it that's equally valid, okay, but we will not talk too much about this, but I'll make some points here, that perhaps even though India have a comparative advantage in agriculture good, still maybe they should not completely specialize in agriculture goods. Completely specializing or producing so much agriculture goods might be inappropriate even if you're a CA. What are some possible reasons? Okay, so we have taught you, right? The law of CA, basically for the law of CA to be correct, one of the critical assumptions is that there's perfect factor mobility. But in the real world, of course, perfect factor mobility don't exist. So if you specialize in agriculture goods, okay, it may lead to structural unemployment. So you shouldn't do it. You should continue to produce other goods. Now, another reason you can think of is this. If you were to specialize in only agriculture good by the law of CA, now what happens if the demand for that particular agricultural good falls throughout the rest of the world? In this case, right, is it clear that once the demand for your particular agriculture good falls, your price of exports will fall? And this means a sharp fall in the terms of trade. Okay, so if you recall what we did for C part 2, now agriculture goods, the demand is price inelastic. So if it's price inelastic, if there's a rise in the terms of trade, which you saw in C part 1, it will benefit India because the export revenue will be higher. But can you see what might happen if India were to specialize in agriculture goods and the price fell? Okay, the price fell due to the demand of the product falling. Now, when your agriculture good is priced inelastic in demand, when there's a sharp fall in the price of the good, it is worse for you because your export revenue will actually fall. So that might be disaster. So this alternative point is basically saying this. Even if the law of CA predict that India should specialize in agriculture, it may not be wise. It may not be appropriate for India to do so. So that is also equally valid. Okay, so that's all I will say for this alternative view. I'm going to stick to the HCI approach for the rest of this answer. Now, for the thesis, right, use the standard 2 by 2 box. So this is where I will demonstrate to you, I will do together with you demonstrate the law of CA to make you able to pick the right numbers. So my two countries will be Singapore and India, as I said, and my two goods will be electronic goods and agriculture goods. So I always tell my students this, okay? Be careful how you choose the numbers. The Cambridge markers, right, they are very sensitive to students, right, who choose numbers that demonstrate absolute advantage rather than comparative advantage. So to avoid this, right, I'll tell students this, I'll tell my students this, begin with the end in mind. So I picked India and Singapore, right? Obviously, India is going to be the larger country. Okay, it has more land, more workers than Singapore. So I'll pick the number such that I'll select India to be the country that can produce more of both goods. Okay, both electronic goods as well as agriculture goods. But I'm going to select the number such that the comparative advantage of India should indeed be agriculture goods. So I always enjoy proving the law of CA. Okay, the law of comparative advantage, if you ask me, is the most beautiful economic concept I've ever learned throughout econs. So because of that, I'm going to take some time to work with you to work out the table and demonstrate comparative advantage together. So can all of us draw a 2 by 2 box? So I'll do like that. So I'll put India here and Singapore here. I'll put agriculture goods and I'll put electronic goods. So as I said, right, I'm going to select India to be the bigger economy. That means they must produce more of both goods more than Singapore. Okay, so now how do you make your life simple is to select the numbers to guarantee that not only does India have the absolute advantage, means it can produce more of both goods compared to Singapore, but India's comparative advantage should be in agricultural goods. How do you do that? I'll use these numbers 20 and 10. Okay, 20 and 10. Then I'll deliberately select numbers for Singapore such that Singapore will be 8 here and 4 here. Now, there's a reason for these numbers that I selected. If you select it like that, right, it should be pretty obvious that India is better at both goods than Singapore. Can produce more of both goods than Singapore. But by selecting numbers like that, right, I'm guaranteed that India's comparative advantage will be in agriculture. But Singapore, even if Singapore can produce less of both goods, Singapore does have a comparative advantage in electronic goods. So I'll demonstrate simply in this script that I'll choose, for example, agriculture goods, and I'll say for India, okay, every 1 unit of agriculture goods, she gives up half a unit of electronic. You can see, right, because of 2010, okay, for every 1 unit of agriculture good, India will give up half a unit of electronic goods. That's op cost for producing 1 unit of agriculture good. But Singapore, right, if you work it out, you should get 1 unit of agriculture good requires her to give up 2 units of electronic goods. Okay, basically what happens is you divide 4 by 4 here to get this to 1, then you divide by 4 here to see the op cost in terms of electronic goods. So for India, right, you divide by 20 here and then you divide by 20 here. That's how you get half electronic goods for India and 2 electronic goods for Singapore. So the point is this, Singapore's op cost for producing agriculture goods is so much higher. Okay, she gives up actually 2 electronic goods instead of half. So by definition of CA, India should have the comparative advantage in agriculture goods. So if you argue like that, it's enough for the thesis of this point that India should specialize in agriculture goods simply because they have a comparative advantage in agriculture goods. Now, if I'm you, right, to play safe, I will add the points that says that India is relatively abundant in land as well as relatively abundant in unskilled labor. That's how India can get these kind of numbers such that it ends up having a CA in agriculture. So that will be all enough for the thesis because you need to spend time on the antithesis. So don't need to draw PPC, nor do you need to give a full numerical illustration using partial specialization. Save that for the 10-mark essay questions where it's only on the law of CA. Okay, so for the antithesis, like as I said, right, the HCI answer follow this part. Okay, that there are other reasons other than CA that leads to India specializing in agriculture. So even if India, right, didn't turn out to have a CA in agriculture, it still makes sense for them to produce more agriculture. So if I'm you, right, when I read extract 2 and 3, I will narrow in on the production subsidy. I will draw a graph. Okay, I'll draw a graph. So if I'm you, I'll draw a simple supply and demand graph for agriculture. Show that when there's a production subsidy, okay, the supply curve for agriculture goods would increase for India. So as you have learned from your JC1, a subsidy will lower the cost of production. And when it lowers the cost of production, the firms will produce more goods at any price. So this will shift the supply curve to the right. So when there's a lower cost of production, you can see, right, the quantity of agricultural goods increase. So it is but this particular reason, right, that could also explain producing more agricultural goods, specializing in agriculture rather than just CA. Now, let me stress that don't override on this part because you realize that for the 10-mark question, you are supposed to talk about the costs and benefits of these interventionist policy. Basically, right, they don't give marks twice for the same point in two different questions. So for this 8-mark question, right, you just want to explain briefly how subsidies might increase production for agriculture goods, but save your points on the costs and benefits for the 10-mark question. Now, you need to make a justified conclusion, right? As I said. So, if you ask me, there's a law of CA that explains why India ends up specializing in agriculture goods. There's also another potential reasons other than CA, in this case, production subsidy, that justify why India is producing more agriculture. So, which one do you think is the more likely reason? Now, if you ask me, right, it's probably easier to justify that is more non-CA reasons. Okay, the whole idea is this. India should specialize in agriculture products only if she truly has a CA in it. Okay, but even then, CA can change. And the thing is this, majority of India's exports goes to developing countries as the extract one says. So based on this, right, these developing countries could also have a CA in agriculture. So it's probably more leaning to the other side, okay, that it is more the government policies, especially the production subsidy, that ends up why India having a CA in agriculture. So basically, that's all. So the next video, we will tackle the 10-mark question. Thank you.